everybody, welcome back to my channel. Happy New Year. I hope that you're well. I hope you're safe. I am here today to do my December wrap-up, chatting about the 15 books that I read in the month of December. I haven't been around in the past couple of weeks, but have some catching up to do on YouTube and have some kind of end of the year videos. Stay tuned over the next couple of weeks, fingers crossed. It gets dark at like 4 p.m. right now, so the light is weird, but we're just gonna roll with it. Okay, so like I said, I had 15 books that I read in December. 2 of these were 5-star reads, 9 of these were 4-star reads, and a lot of them were actually like 4.5, like close to 5-star. 3 were 3-star reads and 1 I didn't give a rating to. And my average rating for the month was 4.16 stars. So it's a pretty good reading month. Let's get right into it. The first book of my 2 5-star reads is Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno-Garcia. This book has been getting a lot of attention. I knew that it was a Gothic horror book. I knew that it was set in Mexico, obviously, and I knew that it had a really beautiful cover, but I didn't know much more than that. Mexican Gothic is set in, I believe, the year 1950 in Mexico. It centers around our main character, Noemi, who is kind of a socialite, aspiring anthropologist, and one day her and her dad receive a letter from her cousin Catalina, who has recently married and moved to quite a remote part of Mexico, far from her family. And Catalina's letter tells Noemi and her father that she is seeing things in this new house, that there are ghosts, and that her husband is trying to poison her. And Noemi's father sends her to Catalina's house to see basically what's going on, if she needs psychiatric care, and basically try to get to the bottom of it. Noemi makes the journey and she spends some time at this house, and things very quickly get pretty weird. About like 70 pages in, I was pretty sure that it was gonna be a 5-star read. The vibes of this book are like very creepy. The house really feels like a character in and of itself, which I think is so cool. It kind of gave me, in some ways, actually Haunting of Hill House vibes, but like way weirder in the end. For those who have read it, you might take pleasure in knowing that I made the grave mistake of eating mushroom dumplings in like the last 100 pages of the book. I would love to actually get a physical copy of this for myself. I loved it that much. So that was Mexican Gothic. The next 5-star read for me, which I do have a physical copy of, but I've already lent it out to my mom, is The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. Damn. The Midnight Library tells the story of our main character named Nora. At the very beginning of the book, Nora attempts to take her own life. So quite a few trigger warnings in this book around suicide and mental health, and ends up finding herself in the quote-unquote midnight library. And in this library, she can choose different books to basically relive her life multiple different times had she made certain choices differently. When she was young, for instance, she really liked swimming and ended up giving up competitive swimming. So she reads one book and lives a life where she hadn't given up and actually becomes a very famous, very successful swimmer, and lives one life where she ended up marrying somebody who she had actually broken up with. The book is really kind of playing around the themes of regret and like what it means to quote unquote live your best life. I cried at multiple points throughout this book. It's an awesome book, I actually think, to read at the beginning of a new year. Simultaneously is around living your life to the fullest, but also accepting that like what a full life isn't always as clear as it might seem to be up front. Big thumbs up to The Midnight Library. We're moving on to 4.5-star reads now, of which there are 4. The first of which is The Vanishing Half by Bennett. I don't know if I need to say much about The Vanishing Half because everybody has read The Vanishing Half, and it just took me a really long time to actually pick it up, which is a shame because it was an incredible book, as I was expecting it to be. The Vanishing Half follows a pair of twins who are light-skinned Black women. They grow up in a town in southern United States where basically everybody looks like them. These twins decide at the age of 16 that they're going to leave home. They move to New Orleans, and from there they end up actually splitting off. One twin marries a Black man, has a Black child, ends up eventually moving back to her hometown. The other woman ends up getting a job and meeting a man and presenting herself and passing as a white woman, and never telling anybody in her life that she's not a white woman. And she also has a daughter who very much passes as white, and at some point multiple years in the future chapter, the daughters of both of these twins, their paths end up crossing. The writing in this book is beautiful. The narrative around not just racism but colorism is unlike something that I've ever read about in a book. Something that I hadn't heard a lot of people talk about is that the book ended up having a lot of kind of queer elements that I wasn't necessarily expecting, so that was cool. The one thing that kind of kept this book from being a 5-star read for me is that I found the ending was a little bit underwhelming. I was kind of ready for like something big to happen because that was kind of the vibe that I was getting in the book. It wasn't quite what I wanted. Next, 4.5-star read, Cemetery Boys by Aiden Thomas. Cemetery Boys is a YA fantasy / paranormal romance. It follows our main character Yadriel, who is a trans boy growing up in a Latinx family. He's struggling to have his family accept his gender identity, and Yadriel trying to specifically prove himself to be not only a boy but also a brujo, and somebody that has sort of specific responsibilities, specific gendered responsibilities within the context of his family and his heritage. He ends up trying to summon a ghost. He's trying to summon his cousin who he knows has been murdered, and instead he summons another boy who he kind of knows from high school, and he has also been murdered, and they're trying to figure out who is murdering these people. And at the same time as he's trying to figure this out, he is slowly but surely developing feelings for the ghost that he accidentally summoned. This book has so much heart. It was so cool to see a book written about a young Latinx trans boy, and then also because it's all centered around Dia de Muertos, it was like, that was just something that it's not a cultural tradition that I'm particularly familiar with, so I felt like I learned a lot about that through this book, which was really, really cool. Again, I think what I probably ran into a little bit was just my typical qualms with YA. Like, where there were strings of romance, I wanted more of it. The kind of twist at the end I had predicted coming, but overall a really, really excellent book, one I would highly recommend. Next 4.5-star read for me was the Unhoneymooners by Christina Lauren. This was my first Christina Lauren book. This is a enemies to lovers romance. It starts off with a wedding between two characters that goes horribly awry. Everybody gets food poisoning except the siblings of the bride and groom. The sister of the bride, Olive, and the brother of the groom, Ethan, end up taking their siblings' honeymoon trip to Hawaii. The only problem being that they hate each other, you know, small glitch in that plan. This just was like a classic enemies to lovers, really, really fun. The setting in Hawaii at like a fancy resort, and they were doing things like snorkeling and getting massages, and I thought the fact that it was kind of travel oriented was really fun, especially at a time when I'm not going anywhere. I just really liked it. It was just really cute. What made it not a 5-star for me? It's funny because we'll talk about this later, but I like a little bit of steam in my romances, and this one was a little bit more like fade to black, if you know what I mean. And it kind of tried to do fat rep with Olive, where she's put on weight and how she's like loving her curves, but she thinks that Ethan doesn't like her body. And then it's hard because it's a book, right? But I think that there's like a lot of focus on her body, but it also kind of reads as though she maybe gained like 10 pounds and is slightly larger than thin. So it was just kind of like not the best, but I thought it was overall a really cute book. And then next is another romance, You Had Me at Hola by Alexis, Daria, another 4.5 stars. Follows two actors, Jasmine and Ashton. They're both Latinx characters. Jasmine had spent her career working in soap operas and Ashton in telenovelas, and they're starring together in a telenovela, and both of them have different struggles with romance. Jasmine just broke up with somebody and it was all over the media, and Ashton has a family and a son living back in Puerto Rico and nobody knows about it, and he's trying to keep them secret. So both of them are really hesitant to fall in love or get in a relationship, but they're in a very romance heavy show together and things happen. I thought, again, it was cool to have a romance between two Latinx characters, and there were a lot of themes that were kind of touched on representation in the media and the importance of having kind of diversity in film and in TV, and also about relationships and like what is and isn't a healthy relationship. I thought it was cool that it was kind of set, you kind of went between in real life and their TV show. Very much Jane the Virgin vibes. Yeah, it was really fun. It was really, really cute. And now we move on to 5 4-star reads. First of which is Elatsoe by Darcie Little Badger. This is it's either YA or middle grade, following a 17-year-old girl named Elatsoe, or Ellie. She is indigenous from the Lipan Apache tribe. She has the ability to raise the dead, and her cousin, who has just been murdered, comes to her in a dream and basically tells her that somebody has killed him. Everybody thinks that he died in a car accident, but that's not actually what happened. There's lots of really cool things happening in this book. The family and friendship relationships in this I thought were really beautiful and really well done. The main character is asexual. It's not like a primary focus of the book, but I thought it was cool to have that representation there. It is kind of at its core a murder mystery in many ways, which is really fun, and you've got ghosts. Ellie has a ghost dog who follows her around, and I really, really loved the ghost dog. There are vampires, there are fairies. It's very much colonial critique integrated in. The role of storytelling plays a really big role. It was just a really cool book and totally unique from anything I've ever read before. So the pacing in this book kind of got to me at points. There were parts that were quite slow and then parts that were really, really fast, such that I was like, whoa. And also the main character read as a lot younger to me than she actually was. Next we've got Down Among the Sticks and Bones by Seanan McGuire. This is the second book novella in the Wayward Children series. If this series is new to you, the Wayward Children series is basically this world where people can access these doors to these alternate universes, and in this book we're going into the world of 2 of these characters that were introduced to briefly in the first book. So Jack and Jill end up in this world called the Moors. Quite a dark and upsetting world, and part of it is run by a vampire, and that was patty shaking. I'm not explaining it well, but I really enjoyed it. I think I liked it definitely, I think, a little bit more than the first book, because I thought actually kind of getting to see inside one of these worlds in one of these doors was really, really cool. Next in 4-star reads is Once Ghosted, Twice Shy by Alyssa Cole. I read When No One Is Watching by Alyssa Cole earlier this year. I'm pretty sure it's gonna be one of my favorite books in the year. But Alyssa Cole is best known for romance, and I had not read any of her romance. It's super short, like 140 pages. I don't know what the trope of this is. I guess second chance romance. That's a romance trope, right? Between Lakotsi and Fabiola. Lakotsi works as a high-level, like, executive assistant type person for a prince in a fictional African country, and she had been briefly in New York City on a dating app and met Fabiola, and they went on a couple dates, and then Fabiola very unexpectedly and without explanation broke it off, and then months later they run into each other on the subway and their romance kind of rekindles. Really cute, cool to read a romance between 2 Black queer women. The yearning in this book was like 10 out of 10. It was really short. I think that was like my one thing, is that I would have read an entire book focused on these 2 characters, but I really liked it. I zipped through this in a night, and I will definitely pick up more of Alyssa Cole's romance. Then we've got Luster by Raven Leilani. So this is a debut novel about a 23-year-old Black woman in New York City. She enters into a relationship with a quite a bit older married man who is in an open relationship with his wife. She comes on hard times, she loses her job, doesn't have anywhere else to go, and ends up moving in with this couple, and it's just like quite awkward and strange. It's a really heavy book, a really emotional book. The writing is beautiful. I didn't find it like an enjoyable book to read. It did remind me quite a bit of Queenie. Queenie is also like a very tough and emotional book centered around a Black woman who is struggling in lots of different ways. But Queenie had sort of elements of humor and joy that I didn't really find in Luster, and maybe Luster is more realistic in that sense, but from a reading point of view, between those 2 books, I liked Queenie more. But again, this was a 4-star read. It was really excellent. And the last in the 4-star reads is backwards, Loveless by Alice Oseman. Alice Oseman is the writer of the Heartstopper graphic novel series. This is a YA about our main character, Georgia, who the book starts, she's at her after prom party for high school, and there's this boy who she thinks she's always had a crush on, and she has the opportunity to kiss him, and she's disgusted by it. And then she goes off to university with her friends and basically is convinced that university is the time where she's going to fall in love and find romance, and she's really into fan fiction and like loves the idea of love. But increasingly, as opportunities are presented to her to find this romance, not only is she not interested in it, but she's anxious and repulsed by the idea of it. This is like one of the only books that I've read. I think it's often the book that people kind of go to if you're looking for an accessible and also just like a good story, I think, about asexuality and aromanticism. I thought it was really, really cool to have a whole book kind of dedicated to Georgia discovering and coming to terms with and accepting these labels for herself. I thought that the friendships and kind of the themes around like aromantic love and the love that she finds between her old friends from high school and her new friends at university, I love that. I think Alice Oseman, what she does so well is she just writes like super relatably. This really feels like you're in your first year of university when you're reading it. I've read some criticisms of this book, which I would recommend, and maybe I'll try to find some and we'll put down here. There have been some folks that kind of say that this presents a very one-dimensional picture of what an asexual or aromantic person looks like. I think has also been some like very valid, very good critique of the 2 BIPOC characters in this book, one of whom is kind of presented as quite angry, and the other who a main role that they have is to teach Georgia about asexuality and aromanticism. Take those critiques, and I think that they're really valid, but I did still enjoy this and I learned from it. This shouldn't be the only book about either of those identities that you read, but that it is a good place to start. Moving down to the 3 books that fall within the 3-star range, and we'll start with the higher one. So this was a 3.75 stars because I can do what I want, and that is Missing from the Village, the story of serial killer Bruce McArthur, The Search for Justice, and the System That Failed Toronto's Queer Community by Justin Ling, a nonfiction about the case of Bruce McArthur, who was a serial killer who murdered primarily queer men of color in Toronto. He was only sentenced in 2019, but these murders had been taking place for a long time before, and there was a sense within the community that the police weren't taking this seriously. There was a lot of denial that there was a serial killer. There's a lot I think that's really, really good about this book. Justin Ling is an investigative journalist who had done a lot of reporting around this case when it was happening. There's like very much a sense in this book that he's trying to do right by the folks who were affected by this case, that he's trying to place a focus and an emphasis on the victims rather than Bruce McArthur, and I think trying to get away from that kind of like macabre obsession with serial killers and actually saying, hey, these are victims that didn't get the attention that they deserve. Having a book dedicated to kind of unpicking that and shining light on that is really, really important. I gave it a 3.75 because there were a couple things that didn't really work for me in this. I found it a little bit hard to follow when you kind of went back and forth between people, between different points in time, and it sometimes read less as like one cohesive narrative. It did make for a little bit of a jumpy reading experience. I think the author is quite intentional about trying to document the relationship between queer folks in Canada, and specifically in Toronto, and the police. He's a little bit less successful in doing that with regards to BIPOC, Black, Indigenous people of color, and the police. It's important because he references quite often that part of the reason why these cases were kind of permitted to be swept under the rug is because so many of the victims were racialized men, but I think at the same time doesn't really go quite into detail about like what that means in terms of policing, that intersection of being racialized and queer. He approaches it, but then doesn't really go into it or give it, I think, the nuance that it deserves in a book like this. I would recommend reading this because, again, I don't think that you're gonna get this account elsewhere, but I'd be curious about other people's thoughts on it. If you've read it, if you're intending to read it, this would have, I think, been a really good one to actually have a book club over, but I don't know anyone else who's read it, so I'm just left with these thoughts. Next, we've got 3.5 stars. You Should See Me in a Crown by Leah Johnson. This is about a queer Black high school girl who doesn't receive a scholarship for university that she was expecting to receive, and her family doesn't have a lot of money, so she enters herself into the running to be prom queen at her high school, which comes with a significant cash prize. There was nothing wrong with this book. This book suffered from being like almost entirely set in high school, and prom in particular, two things that I just don't like or care about that much, is like a good book and a lot of people will love it, and if that sounds interesting to you, you'll probably like it, but it did not very much for me. I gave 3 stars to this, which is Beautiful Bastard by Christina Lauren. So I read The Unhoneymooners, as I said, and I gave it 4.5 stars, and I really liked it, and I was like, oh, Christina Lauren, like I should read more things by them. The woman is named Chloe, which made it possibly more painful, and the guy's name was Bennett. Chloe works as an intern at this marketing company, and Bennett is her boss. There's not like much of a plot. They just have a lot of sex, which is fine. Like, it's fine, except there was like no plot to really pull it together. For me to enjoy an enemies to lovers romance, there needs to be like something redeeming in those individuals, and the boss I just thought was just a jerk. Like, he was just a bad guy. He was sexist, he was mean. The steam element is 5 stars, I would say. The plot, characters, integrity is 1 star, which is why I gave it 3 stars. That was a time. And then finally, the book that I left unrated, which is Me and White Supremacy: Combat Racism, Change the World, and Become a Good Ancestor by Layla F. Saad. It's intended to be a 28-day kind of journaling book where each day focuses on a different topic related to you and white supremacy. So either tokenism or white exceptionalism or white saviorism, all of these different topics, and you read a little bit about that topic, and then the author gives you journaling prompts to actually kind of think and reflect and write more about that topic as it relates to you as an individual. It took me much longer than 28 days to get through this. I took my time, and I'm glad that I did. It's very much focused on sort of that personal individual versus like systemic institutional level. So like, I think that those things go well together, but this is definitely like a really important kind of integral piece of that bigger puzzle. And there we have it. Those are the 15 books that I read in the month of December. Thanks for sticking around. Let me know if you read any of these, what you thought, if you might want to read any of these. Bye.